Justin Fields gives the Jets a big scare, but you know what? It's going to be okay. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, July 25th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Our episode today is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, the Jets got a big scare yesterday as Justin Fields suffered an injury during the team's second practice of training camp in 2025. On today's show, we are going to talk about all the implications of Fields' injury. And if you're a Jets fan, I hope you were away from the internet yesterday morning because it was a nerve-wracking time. I will tell you, I was going for a walk. I was walking to grab a bagel at the local bagel place, and I checked my phone, and I saw the news. Justin Fields limped off the field and was taken to the locker room at the team facility in a cart. And my first thought was, well, if he was able to hop off the field under his own power, and he was sitting in the passenger seat of the cart, so he wasn't on the back of the cart, maybe he's okay. But then my mind started to wander, and I remembered 2 years ago on opening night, Aaron Rodgers also walked off the field on his own power and hopped on the cart when he suffered his torn Achilles injury. And then speculation ran wild over the next couple of hours. In fact, there was a tweet by a fake Adam Schefter account, and that's it's one of the issues we deal with in the world we live in, where there are fake accounts out there who people believe are real, fake insider accounts in the NFL who tweet out news that is not accurate. And this fake Adam Schefter account posted speculation that Fields may have torn his Achilles tendon. And all I could do when I saw that, and this started to pick up steam, and people were saying Schefter said this. Schefter really did not say it. It was a fake Schefter account. I just thought about how ridiculous it would be for the second time in 3 years, the Jets were about to lose their starting quarterback for the season due to an Achilles injury. And that's just in the last 3 years. I mean, if you think about Jets history, it's unbelievable the number of times the Jets have suffered a critical quarterback injury, either in training camp, in the preseason, or early in the season, that has thrown a season off course. I mean, we could go back to 2022 when Zach Wilson suffered an injury in the first preseason game against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I know it's silly to look back and act like Zach Wilson getting hurt was a big deal, but in the context, he was a second-year quarterback. He was really the hope of the team at that point. And the backup quarterback was Joe Flacco, who, has had an excellent career and went on to have some pretty good days with the Cleveland Browns, but a guy whose best days are clearly behind him. You could go back to 2013, Mark Sanchez going down in the preseason game against the New York Giants, which forced the Jets to put Geno Smith into the lineup. And again, you could say, well, how big of a deal is losing Sanchez? Maybe it's not that big of a deal. It still forced the Jets to put in a quarterback who wasn't ready into the starting lineup. Go back to 2015, the famous Geno Smith, incident when Ike Enikapali punched him in the locker room, pushing Ryan Fitzpatrick into the starting line. Now, again, Fitzpatrick ended up having a good year. But there were also years where a quarterback injury really derailed the Jets. 2003, Chad Pennington suffers an injury in a game against the Giants in the preseason. Jets were coming off a division championship season. There were big things expected of the Jets in 2003. They ended up going 6-10. 2 years later, Pennington goes down in week 3 against Jacksonville. And then his backup, Jay Fiedler, goes down on the same series. And that pretty much derailed that season. Jets ended up going 4-12. And then the ultimate Jets quarterback injury, 1999. The Jets are coming off an AFC championship game berth. And the team they lost to in the AFC championship game, Denver, is clearly taking a step back because John Elway retired. There's nobody standing between the Jets and the Super Bowl. And in the second quarter of the first game of the season, Vinny Testaverde suffers a non-contact injury, and Achilles again. So this could be our third Achilles injury derailing a season in the last 30 years. I mean, how unbelievable would that have been? And I think if you're a Jets fan, you have your guard up right now because nothing ever goes right for this team. And look, on this podcast, we break down what goes wrong with the Jets. And a lot of it's the Jets' fault. A lot of it's the Jets hiring the wrong people. A lot of it's the Jets making all the wrong decisions. A lot of it's the owner who doesn't know what he's doing. But a lot of it's also just ridiculous bad luck. I mean, who trades for a future Hall of Fame quarterback and gets hyped up all offseason and then watches that quarterback suffer a season-ending injury 4 plays into the season? The Jets do. And what other possible team that after all this happens could lose their next quarterback for the season in the second practice of training camp? And, whenever big Jets news breaks during the day, I start thinking through like what I'm going to say on the podcast. And usually on this podcast, we get to one of two emotions. Now, I always try and be hopefully I give you something to think about, but ultimately you probably land in one of two places. You either land on joy or you land on anger. You're either happy with something the Jets do, or more likely because of the way the Jets have operated, you're angry at something the Jets do. But if something had happened to Justin Fields, the emotion just would have been sadness, because during that stretch where it seemed like Fields had suffered a serious injury, I was just sitting down and, I got my bagel and I was eating my bagel. So the injury didn't stop me from getting to the bagel place on my walk and having my bagel. But I just sat there thinking, what am I going to say to people? Like, what justification do you have for continuing to support this team that breaks your heart over and over? Whenever you think something good can happen, something bad pops up. And I started thinking about, where we are right now as Jets fans. And, this is the first year of a new head coach and new GM. And that's usually a time of great optimism. You're really excited because you've probably gotten rid of a crew that wasn't working. But even though you've had some rough times in the recent past, you've turned the page. You've moved on to a new regime. There's new hope in the building. But for Jets fans, I think we've just been through that over and over and over. And we've been hopeful over and over and over that there's reluctance. I mean, I think there are people who are cautiously optimistic about Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci. I count myself among them. I think that there was a lot of good that came through the first offseason. In fact, I would even say there were some decisions that indicate these guys may be different from the past Jets regimes that we've had that have not been so successful. But as a Jets fan at this point, after 14 straight years of no playoffs, after 9 straight years of no winning seasons, you're just expecting things to go bad. And whenever you let your guard down for a second, and look, I don't even think Justin Fields is going to be that great, but he's the quarterback of this team. There's hope around him. He's an interesting project. He's got upside, and to watch it potentially all go out the window and the second practice of training camp, that would have been too much to bear. Well, fortunately, the news came out that it's not that serious, and the news just kept getting better as we progressed through the day. At the end of practice, Glenn indicated that it was a toe injury. So you went from thinking, okay, maybe is it Achilles, is it an ACL? No, it's just a toe injury. Still, though, toe injuries can linger, especially if it's something like turf toe. Then the news came out that it wasn't turf toe, it was a dislocated toe, and then later on, still news came out that Fields is day to day. That this is not something that's really going to derail him even in his training camp. So a big sigh of relief. But this whole episode just shows how vulnerable we all are right now, because you have to have your guard up constantly with this team. And fortunately, this time we caught a break. It wasn't the devastating injury that we all feared. So maybe that's a good sign. Maybe for once, the Jets finally caught a little bit of a break. It's crazy to say, like, when your quarterback suffers an injury the second day of training camp, you caught a break. But if you had told me during that whole saga that the end result would be Justin Fields suffered a dislocated toe in his day-to-day, and they think he's going to be ready to go week 1 against the Steelers, which they do, I would have signed up for that in a second. Because that seemed like just beyond reasonable at that point. It felt like it was another classic Jets heartbreak moment before the season even began. So maybe this is a good sign. Maybe this is a sign that things are finally starting to go our way. But we're all going to have our guard up until we find that out for sure. Ahead during the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about the quarterback who replaced Fields running the first team offense on Thursday after Fields left, and that's Tyrod Taylor. And if anything happens to Tyrod Taylor during the season, if anything happens to Justin Fields during the season, Tyrod Taylor will take over. The Jets have expressed confidence in him. And in all honesty, it's possible if Taylor's the better quarterback than Fields, but the Jets need Fields in the lineup. And I'll explain why as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you realize suddenly that you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. The prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. I've used Game Time many occasions myself. This summer, if you want to go see the Yankees or Mets, I mean, I'm a Yankees fan. I'm not really happy with the way they're playing right now, but if you want to head out to Yankee Stadium, or if you're a Mets fan and want to go to Citi Field, Game Time's the best place to get last-minute tickets, but it's not just baseball. You can look forward to the Jet season if you want to see Fields in action, because he will be in action. We were able to avoid the worst case scenario with Fields. If you want to go see comedy, you want to go see theater, you want to go see music, Game Time's the best place to go, and they have great last-minute deals. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we are talking about Justin Fields' injury. The Jets quarterback suffered a dislocated toe on the second day of training camp practices. I mean, that's not Jets luck for you. Nothing is. The starting quarterback gets injured on the second day of practice, but it could have been so much worse. And I think anybody who's a Jets fan who saw the news yesterday between about 8:45 and 11 or noon was really worried. And it's not good that your quarterback dislocated his toe in the second practice, but considering what it could have been, you have to feel pretty good about that. If around 10:30 yesterday morning you told me Fields would have a dislocated toe and the Jets would think he'd be ready week one against the Steelers, I would have signed up for that in a second. Well, replacing Fields in the lineup was Tyrod Taylor, the veteran quarterback who's played for numerous teams in the league. He was actually an old Jets nemesis when he played with the Buffalo Bills. Jets used to see him twice a year during his days in Buffalo, and that was really the one point in Tyrod's career where he was a full-time starter. Aaron Glenn spoke a bit about Taylor taking over the first-team offense yesterday after Fields got injured, and Glenn suggested that the guys really look up to Tyrod on the offense, and they feel very confident in him. And I started thinking about what an interesting dynamic this was with the Jets at the quarterback position, because it's very plausible that right now Tyrod Taylor is a better quarterback than Justin Fields. Tyrod's a veteran, and I think that all the cliches you normally hear about veterans apply to him. And these cliches are given to every single veteran quarterback. I think sometimes they're given to veteran quarterbacks mistakenly. I think people assume whenever you're a veteran quarterback, he'll understand the system, he'll understand where the first read is, he'll get the ball there, he'll protect the football. You hear that about every veteran quarterback. It's not always true, but I think it's definitely true with Tyrod Taylor. And anybody who's ever played with Tyrod Taylor will tell you he's a pro's pro. He's a guy who's very respected in the locker room, really a guy who's a great leader. Again, all the cliches you hear about veteran quarterbacks. And you might wonder, well, if you're saying Taylor might be a better quarterback than Fields, why would he not be in the starting lineup? And why is Fields so essential? And there are reasons for that. Even though I actually think Taylor might play at a more consistent level, the Jets need Fields in the lineup. And, some of it may have to do with the classic ceiling. Fields has the quote unquote higher ceiling, even if he has the quote unquote lower floor. But I think you also have to look at what the Jets have on offense personnel wise. There's not a lot of playmaking ability on this offense. And we've talked chapter and verse over the last couple of months about the lack of playmakers that exist on the offense. The skill groups are hurting. I think there's no question about that. And that was to be expected. We talked heading into the offseason about how, because the Jets loaded up in 2023 and 2024 around Aaron Rodgers, they robbed resources from building the 2025 team. And heading into the offseason, they were not going to be able to fill all of their holes. And unfortunately, they weren't really able to add many playmakers. And even in the skilled players who are good, when we talk about those guys, like a Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's an excellent receiver, but he's more of a chain mover than he is a big play threat. Garrett, he may have been timed 4.3 in the 40-yard dash at the combine, but I don't think of Garrett Wilson as a burner. I don't think he's a guy who's going to toast defenders one-on-one as a deep route runner. Garrett Wilson brings a lot to the table. And again, he's a guy who can shake coverage. He's a guy who can get open. And I think that he'll mesh better with Fields than with Aaron Rodgers. There's been a lot of talk about that over the last couple of months about how Rodgers didn't love throwing to Garrett Wilson, and Wilson was an awkward fit for Rodgers. And the best way I can explain that is Rodgers is a very, very precise quarterback. He wants his receiver to be in exactly the spot he's expected to be. Not a yard here, not a yard left, not a yard right, not a yard short, not a yard long. Rodgers wants you to be in that spot specifically, which means you're essentially running your routes in a straight line. It doesn't matter and within that straight line, you got to figure out how to get open. Whereas Garrett's more of a freelancing receiver, where Garrett will throw a move on you, and he'll fake left and then break right, and he'll be wide open, but he might be a yard away from where Rodgers wants him. I think it's going to be less of an issue with Fields. Garrett Wilson's going to be a big part of the offense. I mean, you can essentially pencil him in for 1,000 yards if he stays healthy. But again, he's not a home run threat. And you look at the offense. I mean, Breece Hall's really the only home run threat. And he's coming off a year where he only broke 3 runs for 20-plus yards. So, we'll see. Maybe that was because he was banged up last year. Breece has suggested he played much of last season at less than 100%. He suffered an injury about halfway through the season. And by the way, all 3 of those 20-plus yard runs happened before his injury. So it's entirely plausible. But even if Breece is back, that's only 1 home run hitter on offense. Could Arian Smith be that guy? Potentially. But I mean, I always want to expect the bet on the under for a 4th-round rookie. 4th-round rookie go in the 4th round typically for a reason. Some of them fly under the radar. Occasionally you get a 4th-round pick who's ready to step in and contribute on day 1, but you can't count on that. Fields is a guy who can produce those big plays, and a lot of them will come with his legs, but he also has the ability to extend plays. And essentially, there are really 2 ways to hit deep balls. One is to have a guy who's a great deep route runner who just, beats coverage within the flow of the play. You can hit him on a long pass. The other is to do it on broken plays where your quarterback can buy himself some time, evade pressure left or right, receivers break their route, and then he hits them. Fields has the ability to produce those plays, but Fields is also the rare quarterback with breakaway speed. Fields is very, very talented as a runner. Tyrod still has some mobility in his legs, even in his mid-30s. Even at 35, 36, Tyrod's going to be able to extend plays, but I don't know that Tyrod's going to be able to break the 20, 30-yard runs consistently. And also, another part of this is that you can make Fields an integral part of your run game because he's big. He's kind of built like a running back. Tyrod's not really. I don't think Tyrod has the same ability to dole out punishment that Fields does, or an absorb punishment the way Fields does, especially at his age. So it's possible. And look, the hope is that Fields is better. If Fields improves and gets more consistent as a passer, he'll be better than Tyrod Taylor. I think if we're talking about the quarterbacks they've been to date, if we're talking about Fields' 4 years in the NFL, Tyrod has a more impressive track record. Tyrod has a more consistent track record. But what the Jets need on offense, they need someone to produce huge plays. Tyrod will hit the first read. Tyrod will keep the offense on schedule. But Tyrod's not going to add a ton of extra plays. And if you had a roster that was loaded with talent, let's say, maybe Devontae Adams was back this year, and you had him and Garrett Wilson, and, Breece was healthy this year. Maybe you added a big play tight end. Okay, that's a situation where Tyrod Taylor could excel, because then Tyrod Taylor's job is essentially get the ball to the open guy. But the Jets need a playmaker at the quarterback position. They need someone who can produce the 20, 30-yard plays on his own. And with Fields, look, he's going to take things off the table. Fields will kill drives by taking the bad sack. That's just, you hope his pocket presence improves to a point where he's doing it less frequently. But it's going to happen. Fields will miss reads. Again, you're hoping he improves to the point where it happens less frequently, where the ratio of good to bad is higher. But that will happen. What you're hoping for are the splash plays, though, because any offense that's going to succeed in this league needs to produce a healthy share of splash plays. And I don't think the offense can produce many splash plays with Tyrod Taylor. And I think Tyrod's the type of guy where you can maybe manufacture enough offense in the short run. Maybe like a 2 to 3 week stretch, you can do enough on that side of the ball to keep yourself afloat, especially if you have a good defense. But if the Jets are going to surprise people this year, Fields has to be an integral part of that because of his ability to make big plays with his legs. And the big plays with his legs could turn into both big rushes and big plays in the passing game because he's extending things. And that's why Fields is so critical. And that's why, even though you may argue Tyrod's the more consistent of the 2 quarterbacks right now, it's why losing Fields would have been so critical to the New York Jets. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the importance of the training camp period for Justin Fields. Because it does sound like he may miss a little time. Now, he's day-to-day, so maybe he won't. Maybe he'll be back on the practice field tomorrow. But I do think there's added importance for Justin Fields that might not exist for a different sort of quarterback on the Jets. And I'll explain what that is as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. Fire up the group chat, get your draft board ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions we live for. It's going down on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, me and Locked On Jets are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. I've used Yahoo Fantasy for years, going back to when I was in college, and I love how smooth the draft day experience is. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. And it all begins on August 4th. Stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy Football League at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. And let's make this fantasy season the best one yet. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. We are, I guess, breathing a sigh of relief that Justin Fields' injury suffered yesterday at training camp practice is not serious. Fields suffered a dislocated toe. The Jets have listed him as day-to-day. And, it was a moment where, like, I saw the season flash before my eyes. It's not good that your quarterback gets injured this early in training camp, but given what it seemed like, the direction we may be heading yesterday, I can live with a day-to-day injury for Justin Fields. But I do think the Jets want to get him back on the practice field sooner rather than later, because I think for a player like Justin Fields, training camp does have importance. I don't think it has importance for everybody. I've been talking about this a little bit this week that, Quinnen Williams knows how to get ready for the season. He's going to be there day one. There's really not going to be any issue if Quinnen Williams isn't there for training camp. Garrett Wilson knows how to run routes. He knows how to get open. He's got chemistry pre-existing with Fields. Sauce Gardner's a great corner. I don't think those reps really matter that much for these guys. I do think for players who are still trying to develop, every rep you get with NFL coaching matters. I think it's especially true in this day and age. Now, some of you old timers, and I'm going to include myself in the old timer group, because when I was an NFL fan, this is how it worked. In the past, you used to get more reps in training camp. They had what were known as two-a-days, where you would have a practice in the morning and a practice in the afternoon. So you used to practice twice a day in training camp. And maybe I'm making myself sound old by talking about those days, but those were really beneficial for players who were trying to develop, because you got so many extra reps. You also got extra chances to make an impression on the coaching staff. And that's nothing to speak of, the way they used to hit. I mean, used to have full pads at almost every practice. Things have changed. The players have negotiated less practice time in training camp. The players hated those practices. The established guys at least hated those practices, which means you get less opportunities. And I think that just means every rep takes on an added significance. And for a guy like Fields, who's still trying to find his way in the league, a guy who has flashed at points, a guy who has played some very good games, but has not played with consistency, has not been able to hold down a starting job since he entered the league, those extra reps matter. And normally what I would say is you don't want a guy on the field when he's banged up in training, especially early in training camp, because you don't want to risk him getting hurt worse. I think with Fields, it's a little bit different, as it would be different with any quarterback. Now, if there's any chance he'll sustain a worse injury, you might hesitate, but Fields and the quarterbacks cannot be hit during these practices. They're wearing the red non-contact jersey, so there's less red. Now, of course, Fields did get injured at a practice while he was wearing that jersey, so someone could always step on the foot, I guess. But there is less danger for Fields, relatively speaking, than there would be for, say, a wide receiver or a corner who is coming off a hamstring injury. So I think that the threshold for Fields should be a little bit lower to get him back on the field. But there are other aspects of this. Fields is kind of learning a new system. And while I do think we maybe overemphasize the difficulty of learning a new NFL system, because, as the old cliche goes, everybody's running the same stuff in the NFL. There aren't really many plays that the Jets are running that other teams won't be running. Fields has run all these plays before. It's really just a matter of the terminology, what the play call is in the playbook, as much as anything. But you want to get the finer points down. There might be some nuances within the given play, and you especially want to be able to get chemistry with your receivers, because those little subtleties, what I talked about before with Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson, you want to understand how receivers run routes. You want to understand exactly where they're going to be on a given play call when you run a certain route, and you will practice things in training camp that will not come up again until like November. There might be plays the Jets run in training camp. They won't run it again until November, December. So getting that first look at how the play functions, there would be some real benefit there for Justin Fields. And beyond that, I think you want Fields to get comfortable with Tanner Engstrand, and you want Tanner Engstrand to get comfortable with Fields, because the way you really develop a quarterback in this league is you start with a handful of concepts. You start with a handful of plays the quarterback is comfortable with running, and you make them your staple plays. Sometimes in the NFL, we get carried away with trying to fool the opposition. instead of just working on a handful of plays that we can execute really well. Because at the end of the day, if you execute a play well, it doesn't matter if the defense knows it's coming. It's always a balance. You don't want to be too obvious, but you want to, if you practice the same plays over and over, you can get really good at them. And even when the defense kind of has an idea, it can be tough to stop. And I think back to a legendary Jets head coach who went by the name of Adam Gase. And in 2019, the Jets offense got off to a terrible start. Then about halfway through that season, there was a report that Sam Darnold went into his office. And Sam said, Adam, I don't think what we're doing is working. Let me give you a handful of plays I feel comfortable running. And these should be the plays that we run with consistency. And Gase's response was, well, what took you? I've been waiting for this. It's about time you did this. And when this happened, I remember my reaction was, what on earth is Gase talking about? Like, why is it Sam Darnold's job to walk into his office halfway through the season and tell Gase the plays he's comfortable with running? That's what Gase should have figured out in training camp. Gase should have taken the initiative. I mean, I don't know what you have a coach for if the quarterback has to storm into your office halfway through the season and tell you these are the plays I feel comfortable running. You should have been doing that in July and August. Well, Jets have Tanner Engstrand now, not Adam Gase. So hopefully with a coach who presumably is going to be a better offensive mind than Adam Gase, the Jets will be working on figuring out what plays Fields is comfortable with running. And those are your base plays. You get a handful of those plays that Fields is good at running. And then once you feel like you've mastered them, you start adding other plays. And then after Fields masters the second layer, you add the third layer. And then that's when you start to become unpredictable. But you have to start with a handful of plays you can execute at a really high level. And you have to learn how those plays are executed, because although there's a lot of similarity across playbooks, there will be little nuances and, a motion here, an option within a route there, just those little things that differentiate plays. And you want Fields to get as comfortable with those as possible. Of course, the most important thing is Fields' health. You don't want to risk putting him out there if he's at greater risk of injury, but it's better for the Jets if he's on the practice field as soon as possible. And that's especially true because in this day and age, you don't really see starters in the exhibition games anymore. We've back in the old days, like you used to maybe see the starters for when they played 4 preseason games, you used to see maybe the starters for a series or two the first game, then you maybe a quarter or two of the second game. The third game was known as the dress rehearsal, where the starters would play 2 quarters plus 1 series in the third quarter. And the idea was that you were game planning the way you would a regular season game, and the players would practice warming up after halftime and playing into the third quarter. Then the final preseason game was the backup bowl. This day and age, the starters barely play in the preseason at all, if at all. I mean, you've seen the Jets the last couple of years. I mean, Aaron Rodgers played 1 series his first preseason with the Jets, or maybe 2 series his first preseason with the Jets. I don't think he played at all last year. And it's not clear the Jets are going to play any of their starters this year, which, again, adds emphasis to the practice time. And it means you want Fields back on the practice field as soon as possible. Fortunately for the Jets, an injury that we feared would be a very serious one sounds like it's just a day-to-day injury. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend. Hopefully we don't have to have any special shows for any additional injuries. We'll just keep our fingers crossed on that. So enjoy your weekend. We'll be back on Monday to talk more Jets.